Excellencies, dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who is with us on WebEx and to who is now joining us on Facebook Live. The Geneva Environment Network and the International Union for Conservation of Nature have the pleasure to welcome you today virtually for the launch of a new series of dialogues on nature-based solutions. As you will hear from our guests today and from our moderator, these dialogues aim to facilitate further engagement and discussion among the stakeholders in international Geneva and beyond, in the lead up to a critical year for nature and society. For those who wouldn't yet know the Geneva Environment Network, let me briefly mention that we are a network of more than 100 institutions and secretariats based in Geneva that make this region one of the global hubs for environmental governance. Administrated by the United Nations Environment Programme and supported by Switzerland, we organize various networking activities, including regular multi-stakeholder roundtables and briefings on major environmental trends. The new journey starting today is co-convened with the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature. IUCN has its headquarters in our region and is, as we all know, an essential global actor, bringing together the world's most influential organizations and experts to conserve nature and accelerate the transition to a sustainable world. Before I give the floor to today's moderator, who will guide you through this session and introduce you better to the role of IUCN, let me remind you that the documents presented today, the summary, as well as the video of the dialogue, will be made available on the webpage of this event. It is now my pleasure to turn to Radhika Murthy, the director of IUCN's Global Ecosystem Management Program, who will be moderating the event and introduce you to our guests. Radhika, over to you.
Thanks, Diana. Thanks, everybody, and a warm welcome to this first event and the series of our events. Seeing the numbers growing on the side here and the participants panel is very encouraging. We know we're onto something good and importantly, something that needs to be discussed. As Diana mentioned, this is a collaboration with Geneva Environment Network, which is hosted by UNEP, and Bruno will take the floor shortly to really give us a few more insights on the partnership and the series itself. But just to say that for IUCN, we want to be honest in this series. These are first discussions of the nature, so there's a lot of gaps. There are a lot of narratives that'll need to develop through our discussions here, but there are also building blocks. There are pillars, there's ongoing work that we're going to showcase and share with you, which can be used as leverage to create this momentum around linking nature and health and our work together to see what we can do. For IUCN, it's also very important, this series of events, because many of the missions in Geneva are also our members. So many of the governments present in Geneva are our members as well. And we really want to work with our state members to move this with the national level commitments and actions, as well as working collaboratively around the world with the likes of UN agencies and IUCN. So very warm welcome, and it is my pleasure to pass this on to Bruno, who will talk a little bit about the series, as well as this partnership and the intent of these events that we're going to go through between now and December. So Bruno is the director of the Europe office for the United Nations Environment Programme based in Geneva. Bruno, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Radhika, and really a pleasure to be with you and to be once again in a Geneva Environment Network event. And what an event it is, because it's the launch of a series of events that the GEN, hosted by UNEP and supported by the Swiss Confederation, is organizing with IUCN in partnership, indeed, as you mentioned, Radhika, and a partnership that is based on a mutual endeavor and understanding that we have to beat the drums on nature-based solutions. These are the solutions at the heart of multilateral action in 2021, in 2022 and beyond. COP15, COP26, we speak a lot about that, but they all have an incredible component of nature-based solution with them. And this is really why in Geneva, where we look holistically at all dimensions of the SDGs, we have to bring the message that nature-based solutions are part of the answer. Actually, I could even say more, they are the answer, or they are really at the heart of the answer. And this is why this series comes at an incredibly at a very timely moment as we try to look at sustainable development by making peace with nature and by tackling the triple planetary crisis that we've imposed on ourselves: pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate change are human-made crises, and therefore they need human-made solutions, but nature-based solutions as well, because nature is going to be our best ally in all of this. So it's going to be a journey. Together with IUCN and together with Jen and UNEP, will be extremely pleased to be where it can be and support the effort, because it is, as I said, a multilateral one, and every agency has got to play its role in it. We start with a session on nature-based and health, and it is so important as for UNEP, we are now part of the One Health initiative, and we'll hear from this, but also because COVID, which is the wake-up call to all of us, is a side effect of our mismanaged relation with nature, to put it mildly and diplomatically. So really important for us as UNEP to be with you, Radhika, and I'll stay short because I think there are a number of experts now who are going to take the floor and drive us in this first session. Thanks again for making this, for inviting UNEP to be part of this, and we'll work together for the best of nature-based solution. Back to you, Radhika.
Thank you, Bruno, and right on time. Thank you very much. Definitely looking forward to this incredible journey together. So I'm playing two roles here. So unfortunately, you'll hear me speak a lot in this 1.5 hours, but hopefully that's insightful, and we can also have an interactive discussion as we go through this process, this 1.5 hours. So what I'm going to do is just flick through a few slides for us to sort of get on the same understanding of what we mean by nature-based solutions. I think one of the biggest risks to nature-based solutions right now is how we're going to take this forward and what we're going to do with it in terms of really understanding the definition, really owning the benchmark, the global standard, the only one that exists, and making sure we're all moving on the same path that we're trying to lay together. You'll see, there unfortunately nature-based solutions is being used as language and phrase that appears just tagged to professional affiliations or consultancies, etc., without a lot of people having connected with the concept or having connected with either European Commission, IUCN, those of us who are trying to drive this one process to standardize our understanding and be able to have one kind of accountability against, some sort of benchmark. So the danger is not, we often jump to these arguments that, oh, this is for greenwashing. Oh, this gives the space for companies to move in and misuse it. But the misuse or the, let's say, compromising its promise and its potential can also come from us as in the experts and technical people and leaders of conservation, development, human health. So that's why it was really important for us to bring this issue to the Geneva community, the Geneva colleagues, and make sure that we understand this in a way where we can move together on this journey. So next slide, please. So I'll quickly go through some of the you can click again, sorry. Some of the scientific underpinnings. People are like, okay, if we have the ecosystem approach, if you've been doing this work for years, then what is new? Well, it's the evolution of our thinking and understanding and approaches, just like anywhere else in the world for any other business. So the business of conservation, as we understand nature better, as we understand its limits, its thresholds, we also need to adjust and rethink and refine our ways and our approaches of living more in harmony with nature. So I'm not going to go through this because of time, but just to show you that, there has been an evolution of our thinking, the science, the approaches. So NBS is that next step in how we further refine our approach to being able to find a better balance between our needs and the limits of this planet. Next slide, please. So simply put, nature-based solutions are what we do in conservation to protect flora and fauna, and how we can deliberately design that to meet conservation needs. So actions of protecting, sustainably managing and restoring both natural or modified ecosystems that can in deliberate ways derive needs for society. So simultaneously being able to provide human well-being and biodiversity benefits is the basis of nature-based solutions. And if I were to flip this around, it's basically to say, you know, nature-based solutions is a solution to a problem. And the problem is how to have enough resources and means of being able to meet our needs, but not at the expense of nature because of healthy nature. And that's the shift we're trying to make here. So next slide, please. So really, it looks at ways we can derive the benefits of nature in a sustainable way to address our most pressing needs. Now, when we defined nature-based solutions in 2016, there were 6 or 7 societal challenges, which are up here on the screen, that were identified: climate change, mitigation, adaptation, disaster risk reduction, economic and social development, human health, food security, water security, and reversing degradation and biodiversity loss itself as the most pressing but most promising societal needs that nature can respond to. And interestingly, human health and economic and social development were the ones that we probably needed to develop a lot further, our partnerships, actions around. And then COVID happened, and as unfortunate as that as it is, that should and must now compel us to really move towards what does it mean for nature-based solutions in terms of economic, social development, for recovery, as well as human health. Now, remembering that this was defined in 2016, the next slide shows you, which is not deliberate, but also not very coincidental. If you click through, the slides, it shows that, you know, all the 6 societal challenges were also part of the risks identified in the Global Risk Report 2020, 4 years later, for what would be the most pressing risks for us in the next 10 years. So like I said, it wasn't deliberate, but it's no coincidence. We know what our problems are, but how do we find sustainable solutions to them? And especially sustainable solutions that don't come at the expense of nature, but because of it. So next slide, please. So simply put, looking at a healthy ecosystem that in ways can help us derive our needs without further jeopardizing biodiversity and the health of our planet. Now, a lot of the meaning in being misunderstood, etc., is being mixed up. So the way to think about nature-based solutions is it really is something where the action itself of deriving that solution to your problem is because you're able to do that because the ecosystem is healthy, and the action of deriving is making your ecosystem healthier. So you're giving back at the same time. And that's where the difference comes with things like nature-derived solutions. A windmill can be standing in a desert in very degraded landscapes. It'll still provide you with the wind energy. And that action of deriving wind energy doesn't necessarily mean it's improving the health of that land or that landscape it's standing on. Similarly, nature-inspired solutions, they can be very complementary to nature-based solutions, but using technology, biomimicry, doesn't necessarily mean it's giving back to the planet in a way where it's making sure we're not taking more in ways where we're jeopardizing the future of that solution, and we're jeopardizing therefore the future of the upcoming generations in being able to benefit from the same solution. So simply put, it depends on healthy nature, and it gives back as healthy nature while being able to derive that human need. Next slide, please. And we also have to be realistic. This is not the panacea. This is not going to solve everything. And we also have to see how it works in a very infrastructured world we live in. So the reality of the world we live in right now, grey infrastructure, technological solutions. So really start looking at how we complement nature as infrastructure, and rather than saying, you know, that is the go-to only solution that's possible from here on. So bringing back green spaces in cities for regulation of heat waves or air purification, heavily modified infrastructure landscapes can also benefit greatly from nature-based solutions. So it's a very complementary approach. Next slide, please. And then, you know, the scene is already set. this whole concept of you can only have conservation or development as in health, trade, disasters reduction, etc., etc., can only have this, we need to shift from that and really start looking at that overlap of people, nature, economy. We can't just look at, socio-ecological angles, people and nature, or socio-economical angles, social and economic benefits. We have to look at that nexus of the three coming together. And even this is echoed with what we see with this wedding cake representation of the SDGs. Nature is the foundations of society and economy. So how can we look at it bilaterally with two or three of those pillars? So enough of saying, is it either one or the other? I have to choose. We have to rethink development in itself, in how we can use nature alongside as an economic development strategy, rather than seeing it as a red tape that gets in the way of your development needs and aspirations. So that the scene was set. What's changed now is we have a way forward, an approach we can all lobby around and move forward together. So the next slide, please. I think it's probably the last one. And that's where our standard comes in. I spend a lot of time trying to talk my boss, Stuart McGuinness, is the global director of our nature-based solutions, to talk about why we don't need a standard, because it was going to be very hard work. But of course, in the 2 years of public consultations, we had 800 people from over 100 countries and numerous working groups that worked on crowdsourcing this standard. It's such a cross-cutting, transdisciplinary standard that no one expert group sitting in Gland or Geneva could have put this together. So I'm not going to go through all the 8 criteria, but the standard is a way we can all move in the same direction with that same level of accountability, whether it's an individual or government, a community, a company. Looking at those 8 criteria in how you design a solution to your problem, defining your problem, your societal challenge, designing it about by keeping that bigger picture in mind, looking at those 3 pillars. You can see in the slide, criterion 3, 4, and 5 are about the 3 sustainable development pillars. Making sure we are honest and transparent and realistic about trade-offs, who wins today, who loses out tomorrow, and then making sure that there is an adaptive approach to it. We're working with dynamic systems, we're working with complex systems, whether it's economic, social, environmental systems. How do we make sure that we stay adaptive? We're learning as we go, and we do not jeopardize the solution by sticking it in time and saying it's going to work for the next 10, 12 years. And then the 8th was very, very incredible and important for us was, so what is the difference? What is it that we're trying to change from one project at a time, a time-bound intervention, 3 to 5 years, to making NBS a sort of a living on solution that becomes embedded in our system. So this mainstreaming and sustainability around linking it to national targets, having it recognized in our global policy coherence mechanisms. How do we achieve that so that NBS is not like the flavor of the month for conservation people or development people for the next few years, but it starts being embedded systematically in the economics and the society, in the environment we live in today. Next slide, please. I think that's probably my last one. Yep, I'm going to leave it there, but just to give you an idea of, this is the context that defines all the series of events that are coming. So we're going to take one topic at a time for the rest of the year, talk this through with you, and we want to make sure that the different perspectives and different groups of us are joining together with that same understanding so we can come up with real solutions that work. And they don't come and go as time or funding allows for it. So with that, I'm going to stop there. And I have the pleasure of inviting, firstly, 2 of our colleagues from UN agencies. We first have Christina, who is the expert. Let me get this right with my. She's the expert of interagency group on biodiversity and health issues with WHO. So Christina's going to talk a little bit about what are the institutional governance processes and mechanisms that are already going on, perhaps that were going on in the past and now have the impetus to be accelerated because of the pandemic. What are those building blocks we can leverage? And similarly, we'll have Doreen Robinson, who's the chief for wildlife at UNEP. She's going to also talk about what are the the building blocks and the pillars that we can start leveraging, work in progress that now has more impetus and that we can drive forward with very robust solutions like nature-based solutions. So Christina and Doreen, welcome. Over to you, Christina, for the next 5 minutes, and then we'll go on to Doreen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Radhika, for that excellent introduction on NBS. And I really want to just begin by applauding the Geneva Environment Network and the IUCN for jointly convening this series of dialogues on NBS, and in particular, for having the vision to ensure that health considerations are embedded in the global narrative through a One Health lens, to raise ambition for nature-based solutions in the development of our responses to common commitments that we all have, including the Paris Climate Agreement, the emerging post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and the SDGs, and to maximizing co-benefits for biodiversity and health to really safeguard the health and well-being of present and future generations. It really is a pleasure to be here in this kickoff event and to have the opportunity to also engage with an exceptional group of panelists. So as you said, and Bruno has also noted, the COVID pandemic really has been a wake-up call. And as a zoonotic disease of likely animal origin, it really has brought into sharper focus than ever before our interconnectedness with nature, consequently revitalizing the urgency and the imperative for more integrated and coordinated cross-sectoral action for biodiversity conservation and restoration on the one hand, but also climate change adaptation and mitigation and eco-DRR on the other, through inclusive approaches such as One Health that fully consider and embed its three fundamental pillars, so human, plants, and animals, and the ecosystems upon which we collectively rely for our health and well-being, as a means to implement robust, transformative, and evidence-based measures to avert and prevent future health threats. So I think that, one of the crucial lessons that we can draw from the COVID-19 pandemic and others that have preceded it for our work in conservation, adaptation, mitigation, and a healthy recovery is that, as you said, Radhika, is that we live in a deeply interconnected, complex system. And as such, moving forward, we absolutely have to break down the persistent silos in decision-making and also readily acknowledge and act on the knowledge that the decisions that we are taking now, that we are taking today on how to build back better from the post-COVID era can either really lock in damaging economic development patterns that perpetuate ecosystem destruction, continue to drive climate change and the biodiversity crises, or we can draw from the lessons learned to invest in a healthier, greener, and more equitable world by strengthening our capacity for prevention, detection, and response through a complex systems approach that seeks to really get to the root causes while at the same time building social and ecological resilience. So as a testament to WHO's commitment toward these goals, this pandemic really has spearheaded a number of initiatives. And for the purposes of this introductory statement, I'll focus on one of them here today. So last year, WHO launched a comprehensive manifesto for a healthy and green recovery from COVID-19, which calls on the international community to prioritize a healthy recovery while also putting biodiversity, climate protection, and equity at the center to prepare and reduce our vulnerability to possible future health emergencies. And in a moment, I'll add also a link to this in the chat following this short presentation. But suffice it to say that the WHO manifesto contains 6 key prescriptions or entry points, as you were referring to earlier, and over 80 targeted areas for action for a healthy, green, and just recovery from the pandemic that center around 6 pillars to strengthen health system resilience, but also social and ecological resilience more broadly by investing in essential services such as water and sanitation, strong healthcare systems, and green energy facilities. And, you know, there really is an opportunity to do so, not only through gray infrastructure and technological solutions, as you were discussing, Radhika, but by complementing this with green and blue infrastructure through nature-based solutions. Another pillar is promoting sustainable food systems. And this one cannot possibly be overstated. You know, our largely dysfunctional global food system really is at the heart of a multitude of health risks introduced through the food production, consumption, and supply chain, either directly or indirectly, whether this be through land use changes, deforestation, for instance, which is at the heart of so many infectious disease risks, both vector-borne, such as malaria, or zoonoses, such as Ebola or Nipah virus. And I'm sure, you know, Doreen and other co-panelists will address these in greater detail. Also, overfishing, unsustainable fisheries, and aquaculture practices that don't only pose a threat to food safety and security globally, but also threaten the livelihoods of so many coastal communities and small island developing states that are really heavily reliant on fish species as a critical source of protein and micro and macro nutrients. Also, the
Sorry, Christina, just a chime check. We're up to 6 minutes, so if you want to start wrapping up.
Okay, well, all right. So I really would have liked to emphasize the need to emphasize the need to address the loss of genetic diversity, because the transformation of our global food system really has also meant a tremendous loss of genetic biodiversity. Maybe we can go back to this in the discussion session, because I think it's important to point out that according to conservative WHO estimates, unhealthy diets alone are responsible for over 10 million premature adult deaths every single year. So just to go through very quickly the other prescriptions of the WHO manifesto, we have a healthy energy transition, building healthy livable cities in urban areas, ceasing to fund pollution to achieve net zero, and acknowledging the interactions across these health threats that are posed in both urban and rural areas, and looking at the resulting toll on air pollution alone and what that takes on human health. We have to consider that over 7 million deaths are attributable to air pollution every single year. And finally, underlying those 5 prescriptions, which I hope we have time to elaborate during the discussion period, is a last one that acts as a crucial starting point that was exemplified by the drivers of a global dysfunctional food system. And that first prescription lies in the acknowledgement that we can and must first begin by protecting the source of all human health, which is nature. So, as you said, conscious of time and the need to wrap up, an important message is that all our attention is currently focused on the COVID-19 pandemic. But this pandemic will recede in time. And when it does, we'll still be left with all of the health risks that were posed by climate change and biodiversity loss, unless there really is concerted, aligned, and decisive transformative change moving forward. So while the breadth of the challenge can be daunting, the opportunity to adopt holistic and inclusive approaches such as One Health, focused on prevention, really has never been greater. So I do look forward to presentations by co-panelists and to the discussion period. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Christina. Some very pertinent issues raised by WHO. Definitely, we need to work very closely with the likes of WHO. I also want to make sure that we do have time for panelists to be able to answer questions and also not rush the other panelists. So with that, moving on to you, Doreen, welcome. And please share with us for the next 5 minutes some perspectives and some ongoing work on nature and health that UNEP is doing and that we can all get behind in accelerating. Over to you. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the audience, for being here, and for all the organizers. We've heard a lot about how humanity's destruction of nature is driving up risks to our well-being, Christina just talked about the 7 million people who die annually from polluted air. 500,000 people die each year from diarrheal diseases from contaminated water. Zoonotic infectious diseases are emerging at faster rates than ever before in recorded history, tied to the encroachment of natural habitats, land use change, and consumption of meat protein. In fact, at least 25% of all emerging infectious diseases are associated with intensified agriculture since 1940. And FAO reports that in the past 100 years, 90% of crop varieties have disappeared, and all of the world's 17 main fishing grounds are overfished currently. The way we live with, use, and consume nature is jeopardizing our prosperity, our health, and our very ability to exist on this planet. At UNET, we believe the solution lies in working with nature, not against it. We believe nature-based solutions are a complement to technological solutions that allow us to support sustainable development options and achieve co-benefits. That's the key, co-benefits from across the full range of sustainable development goals. So I'll talk about the linkages between ecosystem health and human well-being for 3 specific nature-based solutions: urban green and blue spaces, wetland rehabilitation, and forest restoration. First, let me start with mental health, something we know is being strained the world over during the current pandemic. What is a nature-based solution that supports mental health, green and blue spaces? Science tells us that these spaces, particularly in urban settings, are shown to lower stress, promote faster recovery from psychological events, increase air quality, increase physical activity with other related health benefits, and decrease urban overheating, critically important given that Europe has recently some of the hottest recorded temperatures on record. Wetland restoration is another critical nature-based solution. 30% of the world's wetlands were lost between 1970 and 2015, yet about 40% of the world's species rely on those wetlands. Wetlands provide inland and coastal flood mitigation, protection from storm surge, provide critical spawning grounds for different fish and food species. They also store water, and they filter water and waste, and they of course absorb carbon. But now, not all wetlands are alike, and depending on your objectives and goals, wetland restoration can be done differently in different places for different benefits. Some water-focused solutions, if poorly sited and planned, can actually exacerbate health risks. For example, in the case of poorly managed open water systems that can become breeding ground for pests like mosquitoes. But a well-managed water solution that emulates the full range of ecosystem functionality can actually enhance disease regulation while providing clean water. The last nature-based solution I'll talk about is forest management and restoration. The role of forests in carbon sequestration, supporting clean air, healthy soils, and water regulation has been relatively well studied. Intact forests also have benefits for mitigating infectious disease risks. We know that the full range of a forest with a full range of native biodiversity can mitigate spread of some infectious diseases, particularly those that spread with rodent and mosquito vectors, such as West Nile virus, Lyme disease, or some of the hemorrhagic fevers. Emergent evidence indicates that fragmented habitats may stimulate more rapid evolutionary processes and diversification of diseases, in addition to spread. Studies on different zoonotic diseases show that forest fragmentation increases the spread of certain infectious diseases through very complex environmental factors. For example, by increasing the amount of edge of the forest that is exposed to other zones or habitat types or humans, or affecting the reproductive factors of the pathogens themselves or the species they transmit through, or even altering complex predator-prey dynamics, all of that shifts our risk in the wrong direction. The protection of intact and well-connected forests has clear benefits for human health, as well as mitigating biodiversity loss and climate change. Integrated forests and neighboring multi-use lands, a true nature-based solution, requires that landscape, forest ecologists, wildlife managers, agricultural producers, and human health experts all work together to develop options for rehabilitating and restoring ecosystem services, while meeting the other social and economic development needs. We've all heard the saying from our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our parents, good things don't come easy. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. That is true of nature-based solutions. They're not simple, they're not necessarily easy. But without a doubt, there can be win-wins. They can be very cost-effective, WRI reported that every dollar invested in degraded lands gives $7 to $30 in economic benefits. And there was a 2019 study on mental health benefits of protected areas around the world, and it estimated, the conservative estimate was $6 trillion per annum. But nature-based solutions have to be carefully deployed with clear goals and monitoring, and with explicit definition of co-benefits and consideration of trade-offs. They have to involve science and expertise across a range of disciplines using systems-based approaches. And they need to be part of inclusive processes where those trade-offs can be negotiated with all key stakeholders. Well-deployed nature-based solutions offer us pathways to truly sustainable development and a future of living in harmony with nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doreen, and a heroic effort to stay on time. Thank you, really appreciate it. So as you heard from both Doreen and Christina, and also my introduction as IUCN, WHO, UNEP, IUCN, some of the convergence is happening also because the problems we face, those of us working in nature, if that problem can be recognized as a nature-based solutions, it becomes your solution, right? So it's such a neat convergence. Do we need to convince anybody else about this? And also the point that one solution can be robust enough to address multiple problems. You know, a restored forest can give you food, clean water, clean air, and it can go on and on. So why not think of it as, you know, a convergence of everybody's struggles into something where it can be a win-win situation. So it's really great to hear what's been happening at the UN agencies, as well as at the international level with some of our actors trying to move this. What would also be interesting for us to hear about is what are some of the national efforts that countries are leading that can help us think about how to attack this, how to bring this to a national action framework. Well, what does it look like for a country to think about and work with nature-based solutions for the health of their people? So with that, we're really privileged to have with us Her Excellency Ambassador Catalina Devin Aguilar, who's the ambassador and a permanent representative to the United Nations of Geneva from the Republic of Costa Rica. So Ambassador Catalina, a warm welcome. Over to you to listen to what's been happening in Costa Rica and some of those inspirational things that we can get ideas from and help other countries do the same. Welcome, thank you.
Thank you very much, Radhika. And actually, let me first start by thanking you, the organizers of this event, for inviting us to participate in this very timely discussion. For Costa Rica, it's a great opportunity to be able to share our lessons learned and our efforts to walk the talk on the area of nature-based solutions. This year is a very important year. We are, of course, not only facing the challenges of the pandemic, but also we are getting ready for the very international negotiation processes at the UNFCCC and of course the CBD. A moment in which these discussions, as you know, might set the pathway for the upcoming 10 years in our area. So. And in this time, and I don't want to repeat what other speakers have already mentioned, I mean, we're living in a moment in which multiple crises are interacting. We have one of the worst, or perhaps the worst health crisis that we have faced as a humanity taking place. We have a huge biodiversity crisis with more than 1 million species that are threatened with extinction, and probably only in a very limited timeline. We have, of course, the climate crisis, and it's a moment to take action. And in this moment in which we are more aware than ever of the connection, and I think that one of the perhaps most painful lessons of the pandemic is precisely that it has provided us with unprecedented and powerful proof that nature and people share the same fate, and are far more closely linked than most of us have realized previously, right? And this has come in as a key message from the pandemic. So we really need to look back at what are the solutions that are going to be green solutions, that are going to be nature-based, and that are going to help us to recover, to build back better from these multiple crises in a way that will be beneficial for the environment and all its different habitats, whether any kind of species and the human species as well. So this is why Costa Rica has been engaging in multiple processes. One of them, and perhaps a very relevant one, is the one on the protection of biodiversity. So together with France and the UK, Costa Rica is co-leading, co-chairing the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, who has the objective of protect 30% of our biodiversity by 2030. And this is a global coalition that is science-based. Of course, we believe that increasing the protection of our ecosystems and highlighting the importance of nature-based solutions is key. It's key not only to reverse the severe trend of biodiversity loss, but it is also a matter in which we will tackle climate change and this is important, boost our economies as well. I think that we have to make sure to insist on the fact that this is not only good for the environment, this is also good for the development of our countries. And this is our case. I mean, Costa Rica, I mean, and we have found, and I think some of you have already mentioned, how the business case for natural-based solutions is there, how conserving 30% of the biodiversity could, of course, not only create jobs, but also will be it will be more costly the non-action. We cannot afford to avoid the action because we will lose more if we don't do what we need to do. By protecting 30%, for instance, we will grow in 4 to 6% in our economies. It says, for instance, that with that, I'm sorry, 30%, we will support 30 million jobs in ecotourism and sustainable fisheries, and we will add more than 600 jobs to the conservation management, and it will result in a 500 million increase in the GDP of a country, for instance, in ecotourism and sustainable fisheries. But in the case of Costa Rica, for instance, 4 days ago, our country took the bold decision to revert the severe trends of its forest loss. We were facing a huge loss of forest, and we moved to, I'm sorry, I know my time is running off, so I will speed up. There's so much to say. But we, as a middle income country, we didn't have the resources or to invest. And so we had to really face, we come with creative solutions, taking the responsibility to act with national policies to promote conservations for biodiversity through innovation, financing mechanisms, implementing taxes to food, cars, energies. We have implemented payment for ecosystem services. We have created a Biodiversity Act, which embraces the 3 objectives of the CBD. And the positive results of these measures are outstanding, converting our country in one country that was one of the highest deforestation rates in the 70s, now having more than 52% of our territory is under forest cover in Costa Rica. So we really reversed the trend in about 40 years. Our country is also an environmental lab. It has proven that nature-minded pathway is profitable. A recent report evidenced that protected areas and national parks have provided financial benefits of over $1.9 billion in 2018 alone, which represents 3% of Costa Rica's GDPs. So nature-based solutions are a good investment for our country. And despite the complication and challenges that we have seen as a middle-income country, we believe that it is possible to have an economic model that has nature-based solutions at cornerstone of economic and social policies, and that will prove and have proved in our case to be beneficial for our development. We are not going to reverse the difficult crisis that we are facing unless we act forcibly and promptly towards nature-based solutions. Protecting 30% of our planet will undoubtedly improve the quality of life of our citizens and help us achieve a fair and adaptive society, laying the foundations for the fulfillment of the 2030 agenda. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Aguilar. An excellent example of how countries are taking leadership, and in Costa Rica's case, not just showing what nature-based solutions look like and how they can be done, but already having moved to the point of being able to show such promising impact which can really help the economic actors to get on board and start working in similar ways to mobilize NBS at scale for national benefit. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Okay, so we'll move now to looking at, so what's next? We've looked at what Costa Rica is doing, what UN agencies are doing, where we've come to from the past decades of doing conservation development work. But so what's next in terms of immediate opportunities where we can start channeling nature-based solutions and the health link? We can start leveraging processes that are right now happening in 2021. And with that, I have the pleasure of inviting Carlos, who is the Associate Vice President for Conservation and Health within the EcoHealth Alliance, and he's also a lead for the IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management on Ecosystem Human Health. So Carlos, welcome, and if you could take the next 4 to 5 minutes to share a little bit with what's happening with the upcoming CBD negotiations, what are some of the areas of work you've been looking at in how to accelerate the uptake of this nature-human health link. Thanks, Carlos, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all our previous speakers. It was so interesting to hear from them, particularly from Costa Rica. I spent some time over there, and then many of my education was related to how I was, how I experienced nature in Costa Rica. So it's fantastic to hear about that. A little bit of a year ago, I was giving a talk about pandemics, just because start all this, all COVID-19 started, and it was such a great thing to hear from previous speaker about talking about all these small topics that I was mentioning before. COVID-19 has shattered our lives, and from millions of lives lost and millions literally affected. But also that put that in context on how our lives are directly linked to nature. Now, for the first time ever, we're discussing about deforestation, or we're still discussing about deforestation, expansion of agricultural frontiers, global demand of meat, and all of these important threats to nature, but also linked to biodiversity loss, but also linked to our human health. So COVID-19 gave us this rare insight on what could happen if we pause for a minute, if we change the way that we are, the way we are living just a little, not just be a little bit more sustainable. And that that's one of the lessons that we are learning. But also we've seen how amazingly resilient we are as a species, but also how impressive resilient nature is. So in the next few months, next few weeks, and when we discuss more and more about the COP15 on biodiversity, I think again, for the first time, it will be mostly discussed around human health, as we've been hearing from previous speakers, and about COVID-19. But also we will be discussing about how we can prevent epidemics and other pandemics. And hopefully we will be able to talk about how that COVID-19 is just one disease. Every year, millions of people are going through these to problems with infectious diseases, from malaria to hemorrhagic fevers in Latin America to other respiratory diseases. So everything related to the way we are using our natural resources. So things that will be discussed, and I hopefully will be agreeing upon during the next COVID-15, is that human health directly depends on nature, and then and so does our society, our economy. So we are going to be discussing that, and there's been previous goals and draft that explicitly mention these links. Land use planning will it needs to play an important role on all the negotiations. We need to think forward. So we need to ask ourselves, what kind of world do we want to live our kids, our children? And what kind of world we want to live our future generation? That's a question for all the society, but also for policymakers. We need to think, really start thinking ahead. 50 years from now, where do we want to be? 10 years from now, where do we want to be? Nature-based solutions is going to play an important role on all these discussions. Now, restoration, and it can reduce the transmission of infection diseases. Restoration in a particular way can reduce, like for example, improving the configuration of the landscape can, improving connectivity can reduce the transmission of infection diseases. There's some also the role of indigenous territories, for example, or the protected areas, and how those systems can reduce or being, like in contact for thousands of years with nature. So there's lessons learned from these groups. Two more points that I want to make. So One Health, this multi-sectoral approach, recognizing the links between human, animal, and environmental health is playing an important role across all this past year, and it will be over the next few years. But one of the major issues is that not everyone is working together. We tend to work on silos. We tend to work, we don't communicate. In most of the cases, we don't even speak the same language. And I'm not speaking English or Spanish or French. I'm speaking like a plain language and how to communicate the basic science or basic stuff or basic concept to the general population. So that it's going to be extremely important over the next few months. Finally, and then this is an important point that a previous speaker was talking about, is that we need to think about our economy. We need to think about how we're going to recover our economy. So, but financing biodiversity conservation pays off on the long run, especially if we take into account the benefits to human health. So, for example, initiatives to reduce emerging diseases through conservation, through reducing biodiversity loss, and improve surveillance will be way cheaper than having these damages that they come from pandemics. So I hope in the next few weeks, few months, we will be discussing more about these points, and then the role that we as a society can play to reduce pandemics, and the role we can play to recover from this big global problem that we are having. Thank you so much, Radhika.
Thank you, Carlos. Definitely. Let's use the momentum in this next few months. We all know, crisis can also be drivers of change. So let's rethink this and make sure that we don't set up solutions today that become problems again tomorrow. And with that, I want to move on, because we're very quickly coming up to the hour mark, and we do have one or two questions from the audience for the panelists. But before we move to that, to invite Simon and then Kitisak, we really want to make sure that the nature-based solutions ownership is not just in one particular area of knowledge. Right now, we need to move fast. We need to work on the same side instead of against each other. So really, NBS gives us the opportunity to bring in different knowledge systems. And as important as it is to keep building the evidence and the impact and the science around it, which Simon's going to talk about in the context of health specifically, how health is connected with nature and how nature can help benefit human health. And then we'll have Kitisak, who'll talk about the same thing from an indigenous knowledge perspective. So what are these different knowledge systems and processes that can help us get informed quicker and much more, so we can actually accelerate our action and policy. So Simon is a senior scientist at the section of epidemiology, University of Zurich, as well as the Network for Eco Health and One Health Alliance is associated with that. So he's going to talk to us about the ongoing work and building evidence around this topic. And then we'll move to Kitisak, who's the Executive Director at Indigenous Peoples Foundation for Education and Environment in Thailand, I believe. So over to both of you. Simon, starting with you, maybe in the next 5 minutes, you could share your perspectives, and then we'll move on to Kitisak. Welcome.
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you very much for that introduction. Yeah, I would like to connect to the previous speakers and just emphasize that resilience has got two sides of the coin. Resilience means that we remain resilient, or is something we would like to achieve in terms of a global society. But resilience also means that existing systems are resilient and that we are fighting or working against that resilience. So resilience from a complexity perspective has got really two qualities with which it is interfering into our way of managing this complex situation at the junction of nature-based solutions and health. So that kind of leads me to the previous emphasis that was given to the fact that we need to frame the nature and health and the way we understand nature and health, because this is going to lead to a common understanding or those divergent silo understandings. And and as we heard, it took Costa Rica 40 years to come where it is today, and we should expect that it will take time to frame and to change behavior and to move forward against the resilience of existing systems. So with that, I would like to, particularly at the nexus of health of people, animals, and ecosystems, to talk about the two competing narratives that we're having and that we heard today, maybe between the lines, which one places emphasis on risks emerging from nature, and the other emphasizing the benefits that come from nature-based solutions, such as remedies against mental health conditions or ecosystem services such as disease buffering. So the lack of reflection of scientists and other stakeholders about the framing of nature under which we operate is actually a major factor that leads to silos or disintegrated narratives. So integrated approaches to health, in that context, we need to think of research as a socially mediated process of problem solving. And that should acknowledge that knowledge is not value neutral. And when we talk about evidence-based policymaking, that gives exceptional importance to scientific knowledge. And therefore, evidence-based policymaking favors worldviews which endorse the Cartesian reductionist paradigm and have the means to produce such evidence in large volumes. And therefore, apart from some fundamental critiques to evidence-based policymaking, it also poses a threat to equitable policymaking and disenfranchises stakeholders that cannot afford to conduct research for their cause, whilst other dominant science controls narratives and fundings, and also disenfranchises those who have a different epistemological approach and a different framing of what evidence is. So integrated approaches to health are characterized by uncertainty, uniqueness, and value conflict, and they don't fit the model of technical instrumental rationality. And consequently, we need to acknowledge that knowledge is also of transient value as a consequence. And therefore, the OECD Global Science Forum advocates for transdisciplinary research to help address these complex societal challenges. And that will put us in front of this serious work that we need to make in terms of framing what nature means, what health means, and how uniting those and harmonizing those framings are going to give us the basis to then move forward as a united society. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Simon, and thank you very, very much for your efforts in keeping in time. Absolutely, just hearing you and feeling very reassured that we're here to stand united, even if it's with research and scientists who may have polar views. There is now, the situation ahead of us where we start working more closely together and align to see how we can come up with very transdisciplinary type of work that can inform the way forward. Thank you very much. So moving on to Kitisak. Kitisak, I know that you will cover this in your intervention, but I was just going to point out one of the two questions we've received, which very much is probably aligned with what's coming in your interventions of then how can we make sure that because of the complexity of nature-based solutions, perhaps there are traditional approaches that are already nature-based solutions that can help convince society to adopt it, to use these as interventions. So how do we make sure these traditional approaches are recognized in the way forward, and what can they bring to, what can all the indigenous knowledge of living in harmony with nature bring to this dialogue that can help convince people and move the process forward? So over to you, Kitisak, if you could take the next 5 minutes to give us some of your perspectives. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for allowing me to share the knowledge and experience on this topic from indigenous people's perspective. To my knowledge and understanding, nature-based solutions, for me, I think that it's not a new concept for indigenous people. Indigenous peoples have learned and practiced such concept for a long time. It's also part of our life. I just like to give you a few examples on this. For example, the Mani people. Mani people is a small hunter-gatherer group. They live in the southern part of Thailand. They have rich knowledge about food sources in the forest. For example, which are edible wild yams, medicinal plants, fruit trees, animals, and they know how to sustainably use them. Many people, they do not accumulate foods. They collect just enough for their daily consumption. They will move again to a new place when food sources surrounding them are decreasing, and then they will come back again to the same place when food sources are regenerated. So such practice are still maintained by many people, and the ecosystem still good intact. Another group of indigenous people who are agricultural-based group, especially those who practice terrace paddy fields and dry rice fields or rotational farming. Each agricultural practices requires a specific knowledge and skill. For instance, terrace paddy, villagers have to have good knowledge on soil, landscape, water, and irrigation system. And for those who practice shifting cultivation or rotational farming, which the main crop is rice, they require a lot of knowledge associated to this kind of agricultural practice. These are, for example, land use management. They know that each plot of land will be used only 1 or 2 years, and then they will leave it fallow for up to 7 and 10 years. And after that, forest will regenerate it again, and the soil will become fertile and ready for use again. So they know that if we continue using this kind of land repeatedly, soil nutrient will be depleted, and there will be a lot of weeds, which of course require a lot of work and sometimes getting less harvest from the product. In addition, there are also other skills required. For instance, fire control technique during the rice field burning, seed preservation, etc. So these are quite important for indigenous people. So from the set examples, you see that each indigenous group has specific knowledge and on plants, animals, trees, and environment surrounding them. They know which ones are edible, which ones are not. They also know how to sustainably use and harvest them, ensuring that such practices will not cause any negative impact to nature and environment, and there will be enough for the future generations. Such practices have been continued and passed down from generation to generation in form of belief, rituals, proverbs, teachings, and customary laws. Traditional governance and institutions play key roles in maintaining the balanced relationship between community members and nature. These have contributed to community livelihoods, well-being, and resiliency. The transmission of traditional knowledge is crucial to ensure the continued survival of indigenous people. This can be clearly seen from the current impact of COVID-19 and how indigenous people manage to deal with the situation. For instance, they lock down the community for certain period of time, but still they don't have any problem about food shortage, so they can still stay in the community for a long time because they have enough resource to feed and sustain their family. So yeah, so I just like to share the experience from my side. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kitisak. Some very useful insights, and absolutely aligned with you in that, you know, there's so much to build on. The pathway is going to be challenging. Now we just have to figure out the how. The important thing is we know the what, and the fact that, you know, these solutions have been tested and tried for generations by indigenous people, other local communities. It's more making sure how we channel these to become mainstream solutions embedded in our system rather than things that are nice to do on the side. You know? So I fully hear you, and really interesting to hear not only just what the link with nature and health is, but also how within a traditional indigenous setting you're able to deal with crisis yourselves, as you know, as you wait for a more centralized approach from a central government. So that's really fascinating to hear. Thank you. We do have 2 or 3 questions for our panelists, and what we're going to do is try and get ourselves organized in that. But just to break the flow of this discussion a little bit, every time we have a little surprise for you. We want to bring in people who are not in our immediate circles. Often we're talking and preaching to ourselves, who are all in agreement on what needs to be done. So we have a short 3-minute video on looking at, so what can we do as individuals and why does it matter, right? A lot of the times we say the policymakers, the economic actors, the negotiators, these are all people behind them. So what if as individuals, we as people start understanding and acting on this, then who's left to convince? Nobody, right? So what does this mean to us as individuals? Let's go back to that as well and remember that in this journey. So for that, we have a short 3-minute video from Sadhguru, who leads the Isha Foundation. And the Isha Foundation is a member of IUCN. So they work very closely with our office in Delhi. We have quite a neat setup with Vivek Saxena and his team in Delhi. And the idea is to just take a moment for us to reflect, not as professionals, but as people. What does this mean to us, and what can we as individuals do to drive this change that we all agree needs to happen? So over to the organizers for the video, and then I'll quickly get organized with the questions for the panelists. Thank you.
Namaskaram to every one of you who have come together for the Geneva Nature-Based Solutions Dialogues. I am very pleased that IUCN, UN Environment and the World Health Organization are coming together for the first time like this to discuss human and planetary health as one and the same. Many of you are experts in your fields. The way we organize ourselves in huge organizations, all doing such specialized work, focused on one aspect, can sometimes make all these appear disconnected, but they're not. The preservation and nurturing of this planet is not different from aspiring for good life, as there is no good life without a good planet. There is no great life without a great planet. The very body that we carry is just an outcrop of this planet. In yogic terms, when we say earth, we are not only referring to the planet, we are also referring to the element earth, which is a very significant ingredient in the making of our physical selves. Our physical self being a combination of earth, water, air, fire and akasha. Earth is the most basic and stable of the 5 elements. When we eat food, what we swallow is part of this earth. Essentially, we take a part of this earth and make it a part of ourselves on a daily basis. This is what consumption of food is. Consequently, how we treat this planet is how we treat this body. Conversely, in a way, the way we treat this body is also the way we treat this planet. It is very important for us to see what role the element of earth plays in our physical, mental, and spiritual well-being of who we are. If the element earth does not cooperate within our systems, we are not getting anywhere. Most people, unfortunately, develop a relationship with the soil only after death. It's very, very important that we develop a very intimate relationship with the soil, which is the very basis of our making when we're alive. Especially now, with this pandemic around, it is all the more relevant that our connection with the earth and the soil is very, very vital, because we have seen by our experience and we know from yogic sciences that the relationship with the soil, how intimately you are connected with the soil, in many ways makes you super resilient to all these invasions of microorganisms and various other things that may come our way, can be dealt with efficiently and effectively if we have a very profound and intimate relationship with the soil, because soil is the material of which we are made. This will make a massive difference in one's life. Sprouted grams and other aspects will bring enormous sense of health and well-being. Above all, we could easily become resistant to various external invasions that may happen upon us in the form of bacteria or virus or whatever else may come in future. Development and economy have taken us away from the reality of our existence. Our fanciful ideas of what is good life and what is good economy, unfortunately, has led to variety of destruction and damage to this planet, and without addressing all these issues, there is really no solution. I wish you a great success in this endeavor. Let's make it happen.
Thank you. And thank you to Isha Foundation for this video that they put together just over the weekend. We reached out to them very, very late, but we're happy to have somebody like Sadhguru who gives us a little bit of insight into, well, what can I do as an individual and why should it matter to me? So before we move back to Bruno for some concluding words, we do have time for 2 or 3 questions to our panelists. And I'm just going to make a moderator decision as to who I invite for this. But if our panelists can put their videos on and all join online with their videos. So the first one, I think I'm gonna request Her Excellency Ambassador Aguilar to help us respond to this. And it's about how do we so choosing NBS is a good idea for long term. How do we persuade leaders to take decisions for future gains, like Costa Rica did? You said it took 40 years, rather than short-term benefits, especially when decision makers are working mostly through short-term positions themselves. So what is that that click that Costa Rica can share, where people can see that that long-term benefit of investing today? Ambassador, if you're still with, you're still with us, over to you. Thank you.
And thank you very much. This is a very good question. And I think that in the long run and the term run, we're going to start seeing the benefits of nature-based solutions, even if, for the long run, we see the complete set of benefits of it. As I said before, we cannot afford not to do it. What we are witnessing now with the crisis, the environmental crisis, is only going to get us into a worse crisis. Nature-based solutions also have to be considered as part of our responses, public policy responses that are related to human rights, for instance. Costa Rica is defending internationally now the right to a healthy, safe, sustainable, and clean environment, because in our day-to-day, we are going to see the benefits for our people, for our children, for the future generations. So it's a good business, even if we don't need to wait 40 years, even though we need to start to build the sustainable change in many years. I think that the more countries that will join these efforts, the more easy that we are going to see the benefits of it, and the faster that the benefits will grow. So we see that for the transformation in our decarbonization plan, for instance, is taking place so quickly, and it's providing so many benefits to our country in terms of ecotourism and renewable energies. Costa Rica has been able to just transform its system and run in renewable energy, breaking records of 300 days on renewable energy in Costa Rica. And this is something that, of course, is beneficial. It's beneficial for the environment, but it's also beneficial for the economy of the country. And there's no way we can stop. We don't have the chance. I think that countries have to realize right now, states have to realize that we are in a position in which we cannot use the same old solutions for the new challenges that we have.
Excellent. Thank you, Ambassador. Really, thank you very much for that insight. I have another question, and I'm not sure if it, maybe I'll just put it out to Christina, Doreen, as well as Carlos. And it's about looking at global policy coherence, this issue of very siloed negotiations that would happen. How do we look at this interconnections between the different global agenda? So public health implications of implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, access and benefit sharing very specifically, will be one of the agenda items for the World Health Assembly next month. And how can that, the health dimension, influence or build on the COP15 and COP26 negotiations this year? And how can that become part of an integrated transition across environment and the SDGs? So a lot packed in there, but I guess the essence of that question is, how do we achieve global policy alignment and coherence across the health, climate, environment agenda? And how can we make this possible for both nature and development to benefit from? So any volunteers, other Carlos or Christina, Doreen, or any other panelists for that matter? I invite you to just take the floor.
Sure. Maybe just very briefly. Actually, I'm really glad. Thank you for the question to whoever posed that question, because it really is essential. And I think that's part of the reason that we're all here today, is precisely to find a common narrative. I mean, one of the ways to do so is to break across those sectoral silos that I had mentioned briefly in the introduction. And one of the ways in which we can do that is by adopting a holistic, integrated approach to One Health, which really examines, the health of people alongside the health of our ecosystems and wildlife and nature. So I think that an essential entry point really is adopting these holistic approaches to health through nature, and nature-based solutions really is one of the key entry points to developing One Health approaches.
Excellent, thank you. Before I move into the next question, any other panelists want to add to this? Are we happy with that?
I'd like to mention something briefly.
Simon and Doreen, right? Okay. Go ahead, Simon, then Doreen. Go ahead.
It was me, Carlos. So one of the things that I want to mention is that there is also this, we need to speak the same language. So, and that it's critical for when we are discussing, when we talk with public health people, or we talk with scientists, ecologists, or even economists, but most importantly, when we talk with policymakers. So we need to talk with same language, and that helps to break these silos. For example, one of the common languages that I'm using now to inform, to talk about these issues is economics, because most people understand that, for example, if we save a forest, we could save your life. But the way to put it is that by preserving this forest, a government, for example, can save hundreds of millions of dollars. So that it's a way to speak. That's a way to talk with policymakers. But also on the other side, it's also this idea of well-being, that we get all these other benefits that are difficult to quantify or even monetize. So talking about these different components in a simple way, it helps to break these silos.
And if I could just
go ahead, Doreen.
Yeah, just to add to that, part of building that common language around economics too is that we have to roll out systems of true cost accounting for our actions. We do very interesting accounting as humans in terms of benefits and costs, and environment is often left behind. So that's one thing to build the language. The other point I would make is policy coherence. Much of it can be negotiated at an international level, and the value of that is, of course, bringing in these diverse experience and expertise, but we can't leave policy coherence just to the international level. It's so important to invest in it at national levels, and these, particularly in high-risk countries where already health systems are under threat, and they have the double whammy of environmental systems under threat. So we can't leave that behind. We can't expect everything to be negotiated internationally. We have to invest in countries.
Excellent, thank you.
Maybe just to add to that, maybe just to add to those excellent points. So really breaking across those silos, looking at true cost accounting and looking at the economics of that. We already have very powerful arguments to do so. And one of the ways in which we can do so is bearing in mind the fact that that investing in prevention is infinitely less costly than pandemic response, and the COVID-19 crisis, I think, is an excellent example of that.
Thank you, Christina. I know there are many questions coming up, but what we'll do is we'll try and answer them afterwards. Although I want to take one more, and I want to direct this to our two participants who haven't had a chance to interact during the Q&A. For both Kitty Sack and Simon, what are the forums or different fora you would identify when exchanging among all concerned scientific and political constituencies to meet openly and discuss this dimension, I guess, the health and nature? It seems that everyone complains in his or her own silo that the others remain, and that they remain in their boxes. So Kitty Sack and Simon, if you want to shed some light to it, and then from that we'll start wrapping up, because we very quickly are reaching our hour-and-a-half mark. So either one of you, if you're welcome to take the floor. If we need to create new forum, let's have a discussion on that as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I just like to respond to that questions. Well, actually, the discussions about the scientific knowledge and traditional knowledge, I think, has been taken place at different forums and forums. For instance, at the IPBES, also discussed about this one, and also in the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They also discussed about the traditional knowledge on adaptation. And in the Convention on Biological Diversity, they're also talking about the Article 8J about the traditional knowledge, and Article 10C about the sustainable use of the natural resources and biodiversity. So, but I think that at the global level, I think that the discussion on the scientific knowledge and traditional knowledge, I think, is quite open. But the problem is how to translate this kind of discussion into the implementation on the ground. Yeah, that's, I think, remain a challenge, because this also depends very much on the government policies at the country level. Sometimes they are not interested in supporting this kind of area. So yeah, it remains there. Yeah, that's the challenge that we face at the moment. Thank you.
Absolutely, I hear you. Thank you, Kitty Sack. Simon, any concluding comments before we start concluding from our side?
Well, I think we have a twofold challenge. One is the structure of science, or the structure of academia, if you want. Is that it's actually strongly hierarchically organized, and people that are actually engaged in the discourse have basically had in the past to prove that they're worthy of that exchange. And I think that kind of puts a barrier to the engagement of young, innovative scientists that may be more, that may be thinking in a completely different way, but have obviously then not proven worthy of the conventional way of thinking. And that is a kind of the meritocracy mechanism in science actually makes it very difficult for young scientists to engage in this conversation. So I think if you were asking about fora that are needed, there may be a need to reach out to young scientist organizations that basically bypass existing hierarchical, ways of engaging. And maybe to conclude, I think we have a general challenge in science, and I suspect in the Western world, a general challenge in our way of thinking, because we're strongly influenced by Cartesian thinking, which separates the mind from the body. And as Sadhguru pointed out quite clearly, is that we need to reconnect with our earth. So we need to reconnect our minds to our body and realize how this unity cannot be dissected and should not be separated. And that is something that is deeply, deeply, deeply entrenched in our scientific way of thinking, and also our societal way of arguing, our way of negotiating, and our way of organizing ourselves. So this is a challenge that we will all have to meet together, and where we just need a lot of awareness about the fact that we're strongly influenced by Descartes' thought that the mind is separate of the body.
Wow, great. Thank you, Simon, especially coming from our scientist on this panel. I'm very happy to hear about that intervention. Thank you very, very much. And a sincere thanks to all our panelists for this. I'm going to look for my partner in crime. Bruno, where are you? Bruno is still online somewhere. Okay, as we start concluding, I think one thing...
there, Radhika. The partner in crime, indeed. I just cut the video while listening, and what a beautiful session it was. And we've also, during the questions and answers now, just really brilliant remarks and comments that were made. And I'm really thrilled that this journey has started now with IUCN and with bringing really nature-based solution into the debate here in Geneva. I think going forward, the Geneva Environment Network will work to build sessions that are articulated around a number of thematics, and will reply to the needs, also some of the needs that have been expressed today about scientific debate and about how to get nature-based solution in the private sector, in all debates of the United Nations and so on. But really a wonderful first debate to open the series, and it's already close to 4:30. So I'll stop there, and back to you, Radhika, and thanks to all panelists from me as well.
Thank you, Bruno. And a big thanks to Diana from Geneva Environment Network, and also Veronica, who's part of my team in Glon. I think if one of the things you're walking away from this, from hearing this, is like, I still don't know what nature-based solutions and health means. It's not because it's so broad and abstract, it's because it's so specific. It's a very specific solution that needs to be designed, because there's so many elements to it, right? The mental health, nutrition, air, water. So there's so many intricacies that are linked with our health and nature. The idea is to set the scene and set the framework around which we will start creating some of these narratives so that we can push the policy and action on it. So it's not because it's abstract, it's because it's that specific a solution where, with an hour and a half just doesn't give us time to go into any details of it, but to do this stock take with you and to just hear from everybody. I think Bruno, I can speak for Bruno as well, that we already have so much to build on, that we thought we were our starting point was elsewhere, but we have so much good work underway that I'm really convinced that we can move on this in this direction with much more urgency and acceleration. So thank you, everybody. Thank you very much from Jen, from UNEP and IUCN. And we hope to then see you on the 7th of June at 3 p.m. and listen and understand about how restoration of ecosystems can be a nature-based solutions. So take care, stay safe, and join us in June for the next one. Thanks, everybody. And thanks to all the panelists.